Buongiorno, ho deciso di fare la presentazione in italiano perché per una musicologa italiana e qualcuno che studia l'opera italiana come io, è un piacere sempre e credo che qui più o meno tutti capiscono l'italiano. Per i portoghesi non è talmente difficile, è una cosa che si può fare, si capisce, quindi intenterò parlare un po' tranquillamente. Però è un gran piacere stare qua oggi. Per me è la prima volta al Alpiarça, anche se abito da 40 anni a Lisbona, che è qua vicino. È sempre il problema, generalmente non usciamo dal nostro piccolo territorio. E è un gran piacere essere qua oggi e poter presentare la professoressa Benedetta Saglietti, che è una distinta musicologa italiana, insegnante di storia della musica, che si è laureata a Torino con Giorgio Pestelli, musicologo assai conosciuto dalla mia generazione, non forse per i più giovani, ma per me anche, perché abbiamo tutti letto il suo libro su Mozart, Haydn e Beethoven. E adesso insegna al Conservatorio di Brescia, vicino a Milano, e è una nota specialista in Beethoven e la sua storiografia. Ha scritto assai su Beethoven, un libro fondamentale sui ritratti e immagini di Beethoven. Ha anche scritto più recentemente un libro sulla la recensione della Quinta Sinfonia di Beethoven, scritta da E.T.A. Hoffmann. Tutti quelli che hanno fatto la disciplina di storia della musica dell'Ottocento con me alla facoltà di Scienze Sociali e Umane hanno letto la traduzione portoghese, forse non l'originale, però hanno letto una traduzione di una recensione di Hoffmann. Quindi è per me un gran piacere che sentiamo la professoressa Benedetta Saglietti oggi, che ci parlerà di With Love, Connecting, Commissioning and Restoring Beethovenian Art in Italy. Grazie.
Grazie veramente per questa presentazione. Good morning to all the participants present here in Alpiarça and to those who follow the live stream online. First, I would like to thank Lucia Aurora Roja for the organization of this symposium, Casa dos Patudos and its curator Nuno Oliveira Prates for having me. When I thought to objects and images of music in public and private art museums related to Beethoven in Italy, many possibilities came to my mind. I asked to myself, what roles plays Beethoven today in the arts? Does he still arouse interest? Trying to answer to these questions, I would like to talk about a restoration of a Beethoven bust recently resurfaced and exhibited in a public museum in Piemonte region, northwest Italy, not far from Turin, where I live, then a private collection near Trieste in Friuli Venezia Giulia, and at the end, a newly commissioned bust created for a private buyer in Macerata, in the center of Italy. I'm sorry because a short piece, the last piece of my paper was cut in the abstract, so the last part is about the newly commissioned bust. So let's start with Leonardo Bistolfi. Leonardo Bistolfi first attended the Brera Academy in Milan, where he had been in touch with the Scapigliatura, one of the first avant-garde movement, and then he moved to Turin. Bistolfi became an exponent of Italian symbolism, one of the most important one. He worked especially on memorials, and he specialized in funeral arts. The Civic Museum of his hometown, Casale Monferrato, contains his huge cast gallery. His most famous sculpture, a memorial for the painter Giovanni Segantini, is probably the Beauty Freed from Matter, 1906, of which there are many preparatory models and variants. This one is the version of the Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Moderna in Rome. At the end of the 19th century, Bistolfi and the young Arturo Toscanini were often guests of a small castle in the country, a cultural center held by Luigi Ernesto Ferraria, a composer and a patron of the arts. There, Bistolfi had his secondary studio as a painter. Ferraria commissioned the bust to Bistolfi, even if we don't know exactly when and on what occasion. However, still at the end of the 19th century, Beethoven's symphonic music was just beginning to be performed in Italy, everywhere, except in Lombardy, of course. One of the turning points was the first, in Piemonte especially, one of the turning points was the first Esposizione Generale, a world's fair, in Turin in 1894, where almost all 9 symphonies were performed, only the scherzo of the 9th symphony. Ferraria and Bistolfi were there, and maybe this event thrilled both. We don't know. As a young boy, Bistolfi played the violin, and Beethoven was his favorite composer. It is not difficult, therefore, to imagine that Beethoven could be the topic of discussion between a music lover sculptor, a composer, and a young conductor. Beethoven's bust belongs to the first artistic period of Bistolfi that was influenced by the Milanese scapigliatura. During the 1870s, Giuseppe Grandi, Bistolfi's major inspiration, invented the painterly concept of sculpture. One of these ideas prevailing in those decades was the aesthetics of non-finished, and you can see a similar style in Bistolfi's bust of Beethoven. But where did his inspiration come from? We can only speculate. Anton Dietrich's idealizing work of 1821 was well known through lithographies even in Italy, but its appearance is quite different from Bistolfi. The interpretation here of Bistolfi is a romantic one. The model may be the work, now lost, of Hugo Hagen, a sculptor born in Berlin, but active in Germany, Latvia, and Belgium. Even if we don't know where Bistolfi could have seen it. Bistolfi's Beethoven's bust was listed in his general catalogue, but remained for a long time in the depository of the Civic Museum. It was restored and unveiled some months before the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. The buyer was, as said, Luigi Ernesto Ferraria. Bistolfi set up his secondary studio in Ferraria's castle, painting from life and drawing as a divertissement. To reciprocate the hospitality or simply as a gift, Bistolfi honored his friend Ferraria, making a charcoal portrait of him, signed and dated 1897. We can therefore assume that the bust, even the Beethoven bust, was made in the same period. Ferraria's portrait were recently donated by Gianmarco Savio, an antique dealer. Today, we can see on display in Casale Monferrato Beethoven's bust and inspired portrait made by the same artist. That is very unusual. Both were also part this year of the exhibition Vedere la Musica in Rovigo at Palazzo Roverella, curated by Paolo Bolpagni, where I curated the Beethoven room. In short, this is a Beethoven image rediscovered, restored, and exhibited, as the title of my keynote says, surely with love. Now, I would like to shortly present a private collection, property of the Famiglia Carrino, The Biblioteca Beethoveniana, Beethovenian Library, is located in Muggia, not too far from Trieste. This collection comprises more than 11,000 items related to Beethoven, his music, and his myths, from the early 19th century to the present day. The goal of the Carinos is to collect as much as possible about Beethoven. The library, 4,500 books, open to the public by appointment, contains a score, among them many first editions, such as the 5th and the 6th symphonies, secondary literature, newspapers, and magazines. Painting and sculptures are well represented. The collection includes about 150, and I chose to show you here the most important piece, symbol of this collection. A very young Marcello Mascherini realized his head in marble in 1925. A second later copy of this Beethoven, in colored plaster, is part of the collection of the Museo Revoltella in Trieste. The head in the Carinos collection, in bronze with a dark green patina, is placed on a simple square base. Mascherini exhibits this Beethoven at his first solo exhibition that took place in Trieste. The head isn't influenced by previous Beethoven's depictions. It tends to abstraction. One important characteristic is the mouth, a physical feature symbolizing inflexible willingness and the ability to fight against destiny. Rich is the graphic art section too. Here my highlight is on Arthur Paunzen's portfolio on Beethoven's symphony, that similarly I wanted to add Vedere la Musica in Rovigo. Paunzen was an Austrian etcher, engraver, and illustrator that created a series of etchings not only about music. This work dates back to 1918. The portfolio comprises 5 etchings. 2 of them are dedicated to the Eroica, one to the 5th, another to the 6th, and to the 9th. Music becomes here a symbolic image. Sometimes Paunzen invented a story with elements related to the symphony, the hand of fate of the 5th, as you can see. Other times, just depicted a detail. In the 6th, the stylized merry gathering of the country folks. From the newspaper section, you can see the Illustrazione Italiana cover. L'Illustrazione Italiana was a weekly journal very popular in Italy. 27th March 1927 issues is dedicated to the first centenary of Beethoven's death, and it is illustrated by Giulio Cisari, an Italian xylographer and painter. The iconography here is based, as you can see, on Beethoven's facial mask realized from life by Franz Klein in 1812, that we have seen on the other day. In another, we can see this mask many times, of course, because this is a very realistic impression of living Beethoven. Cisari had the piercing eyes and a laurel wreath. The result is a vibrant image of Beethoven, a little bit inquiring. The House Museum preserves more than 2,700 postcards, mostly printed between the last decades of the 18th century to the First World War. Some of them, for example, reproduce famous monuments or paintings or recursive themes, such as Beethoven in the nature or the composer in search of the inspiration, or advertise a concert or a festival. A special place is occupied by ex libris, also known as book plates, that were frequently the secondary artistic production of engravers and illustrators. Here you can see Alfred Kosman etching that represent Caroline von Dahlberg's favorite composer using Franz Klein's Life Mask. According to this private museum mission, the collection includes also minor arts, such as medals and coins. This medal, made by Joseph Nicolaus Lang after 1827, is the first one conceived to pay homage to Beethoven. It is known at least in 3 pieces located at Beethoven House in Bonn, in the Museo Teatrale alla Scala in Milan, and in the Carino collection in Muggia. Postage stamps, too, are part of the collection. Here, I show you the first stamp that depicts Beethoven, issued from a private postal service in Altona, Hamburg, 1899. The stamp was worth 20 pfennig and was printed by Jean Holz. The Carinos do not disdain objets d'art, lamps, spoons, porcelain, house decoration, collectible cards, kitsch, and even wine, coffee, and sweets. When they lend items from their collection, it happened in Bonn, Baden-by-Wien, Paris, and Rovigo, particular sensation made ephemeral objects, for example, advertisement. The long tradition of commercial exploitation of Beethoven goes from radios to vinyl records, music instruments, from beverage to bank services. Now, apparently, we were back to Hugo Hagen's lost bust of Beethoven. Hagen was the starting point of a newly commissioned bust of Beethoven in Macerata, central Italy. The buyer is Guglielmo Borgiani, a lawyer, music enthusiast. The sculptor, Marco Cingolani. This bust was born in 2020 from the love of Borgiani for Beethoven. He did choose the model, Hugo Hagen, to obtain a first copy modeled in clay. The likeness of this copy is good, and the result is an interpretation of Hagen's work that I followed step by step. But this is just one side of the work. What interests me the most is the contemporary reinterpretation of Cingolani. His metal sculptures are conceived from a form on which the sculptor applies metal bars welded together. So we go to the concreteness of the realism to the 3-dimensional abstraction. Cingolani's work is concerned with emptiness that he investigates within its possibility by means of essential constructional modulus. The condensation into apparently solid volumes in reality present changeable masses full of air. Here you can see the final result, and Cingolani with Guglielmo Borgiani. What remains of Beethoven? I think it remains just the essence. According to Cingolani, what counts is invisible. I think just as the space between notes, as the famous quote attributed to Mozart said. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie per questa interessante comunicazione su rappresentazione di Beethoven. Io vorrei chiedere se ci sono domande. Do you have questions, please? You can ask in any language. We will try to. No? Io non proprio direttamente su questi esempi che avevi presentato, però su un'altra rappresentazione di Beethoven da un pittore italiano della fine dell'Ottocento, Ludovico Balestrieri.
Sì, Leonello Balestrieri.
Leonello, sì, è vero. E mi ha toccato proprio il suo titolo, perché questo culto di Beethoven c'è molto da vedere con l'idea dell'amore, un amore qualche volta familiare, coltivato all'interno della propria famiglia, della propria casa. Mi ricordo sempre che nei conservatori portoghesi, però per tutta l'Europa, forse anche negli Stati Uniti, c'era sempre un piccolo busto di Beethoven sul pianoforte dell'insegnante, e anche a casa dei musicisti amatori, dei dilettanti, c'era sempre il piccolo busto di Beethoven. Io ho cresciuto con due immagini di Beethoven, forse prima di sentire una nota di qualsiasi opera di Beethoven lo conosceva già, perché dai miei nonni c'erano due immagini di Beethoven. Una in gesso che non riesco a sapere da chi era, e adesso non c'è più nella famiglia, e l'altra era quella famosa incisione sonata Kreutzer da Leonello Balestrieri. Lei sa qualcosa di più su questa immagine che ci possa dire, perché è qualcosa che mi tocca particolarmente, che c'è da vedere con questa idea dell'amore familiare, del culto di Beethoven all'interno della famiglia, nelle collezioni, eccetera.
Continuo in italiano, quindi sì. Leonello Balestrieri vinse un'esposizione parigina del 1900 con questo dipinto variamente titolato Beethoven, ascoltando Beethoven, oppure Sonata a Kreutzer. È un dipinto di grandissime dimensioni, 2,40 metri per 3. 3 metri per 2,40. È molto famoso ed effettivamente ha una storia anche molto interessante che riguarda Balestrieri come artista bohemien, veramente bohemien, un artista povero che arriva a Parigi e che nessuno conosceva prima.
Tutto quello di cui parlava Lydia Gurr 2 giorni fa, esattamente lo stesso ambiente.
Sì, la bohème, diciamo così, gli amici e i personaggi raffigurati nella rappresentazione di Ascoltando Beethoven sono veramente degli artisti squattrinati e i reali amici del pittore e gli ascoltatori della sonata Kreutzer, che viene suonata al fondo della tela, che ha una grande prospettiva semicentrale, al fondo della quale noi vediamo soltanto un pianista di spalle che suona, un violinista molto romanticamente ispirato che suona la sonata Kreutzer, ce lo dice il titolo alternativo, e apparentemente Beethoven in questa opera non c'è. Al fondo della rappresentazione, sopra il pianoforte, una macchiolina bianca su una parete scarlatta rappresenta Beethoven. Lo vediamo perché è un raggio di luce che è un elemento stilistico tipico di Balestrieri, esce da una finestra e converge direttamente sul fondo della tela, la cui prospettiva è semicentrale. E effettivamente Balestrieri fu molto fortunato, ma credo che la grande potenza di quell'immagine, al di là della sua grandezza fisica, perché uno deve essere lì davanti a guardarlo, no? Cioè deve immaginare questi 3 metri di fronte a sé con i personaggi quasi a grandezza naturale. Beethoven è presente, molto presente, pur essendo di fatto assente. Aniello Balestrieri elabora questo tema, un tema iconografico già noto dalla seconda metà dell'Ottocento, in modo totalmente originale. Va a Parigi, è sconosciuto, Beethoven è veramente un artista di punta a Parigi in quel momento, lo è da soltanto 70 anni, se ricordate che Berlioz non conobbe se non molto tardi le sinfonie di Beethoven, 1828, e quindi in questi 70 anni Beethoven è diventato una presenza, un'icona, assolutamente. E certo, l'amore è per l'arte, per Beethoven, per il desiderio di affermazione professionale nella più importante esposizione d'arte, ed è stata estremamente riprodotta questa immagine, tanto che forse ha persino un po' creato il mito che Aniello Balestrieri fosse solo ed unicamente il pittore di Beethoven e basta. Quindi è un grandissimo successo che forse lo ha in qualche modo confinato in quel tema. Grazie, bella suggestione.
Prego.
Mi stavo chiedendo se la digitalizzazione degli ultimi anni anche la digitalizzazione degli ultimi anni che ha investito tutta l'arte e tutto il comparto grafico avesse in qualche modo aiutato l'immagine di Beethoven, ma in senso più kitsch che realistico o meno.
Ha aiutato l'immagine di Beethoven a essere più multisfaccettata, più complessa. Quindi oggi abbiamo una consapevolezza di tutte le copie magari non molto interessanti dal punto di vista artistico o non molto somiglianti a come immaginiamo noi Beethoven, che appunto è sempre Franz Klein 1812 punto di riferimento, punto di riferimento e di confronto per la somiglianza, punto di partenza per una interpretazione nuova, e di qui noi possiamo giudicare se l'arte che appunto troviamo magari digitalizzata ha un criterio di somiglianza oppure no. In realtà ho immaginato di esplorare le immagini di Beethoven senza questo pregiudizio, quindi la digitalizzazione mi ha molto molto aiutata. I'm sorry for those who do not understand Italy. We are just shortly talk about Aniello Balestrieri's painting. The title is Beethoven. It was done in the first year of the 1901. Sorry. And he won a very important art exhibition in Paris. It is super popular. It was exhibited in Vedere la Musica, the copy that come from Turin, from the GAM. It is not exhibited, but it is a very good copy, but a very smaller one. And it was the starting point of a new century, of a new feeling about Beethoven, really, really romanticized. And then he asking me about the digitalization of images. Of course, 10 years ago when I started my work, it was very different because I have to imagine to search for certain works that were not available in books, and also the primary goal of my works was to treat the Beethoven images, portraits, sculpture, and so on, like works of art without any prejudice. So. Contextualizing, taking the works of art and making them again part of the whole story, of the whole iconographical story of Beethoven. And yes, now it seems quite easier to write something about this theme. Also because the collection of Muggia is open to the public, so they lend items that they are very generous with scholars. So the Beethoven image is improving, is become more complex. Yeah.
Do we still have any more questions? Are we on? I lost totally the sense of time.
Yes. 40 minutes. Stop.
Maybe stop? Okay. So thank you very much, Benedetta. Thank you very much.
So just a few moments. Welcome to Angela Flores Baltasar. That she's going to speak about Beethoven Revisited.
So, good morning. Thank you for having me here. So, I'll start. This communication is a result of my research, of the research I did for my master dissertation. Which focuses mainly on the activity of Orquestra Sinfónica Juvenil and how it became part of the social and cultural life of Lisbon in the 70s and the 80s. The Orquestra Sinfónica Juvenil was founded in 1973 and was the first private initiative orchestra for the youth, a project that, besides being quite convenient for the intentions of the Secretariat of Youth, still during Marcelo's Caetano regime, also promised to ensure the future of Portuguese professional orchestras, training young instrumentalisms with this specific practice. We are talking about young people between 13 and 25 years old, coming from music schools such as Academia de Música de Santa Cecília, Conservatório Nacional, and Academia de Amadores de Música, as well as from philharmonic bands from Lisbon and its surroundings, who, to the lack of professionals in this sector, it was important to gain orchestral experience in a fast and objective way. Therefore, any of these instrumentalists, especially the ones that played string instruments, started their professional life between the ages of 16 and 18. Alongside this, the first decades since the orchestra was founded, youth as a social identity has begun to develop in the logic of a growing mass society, where consumption and communication start to construct its social ideal and stereotypes. Today, the orchestra has around 80 members from 14 to 30 years old and still works on this approach to the public through an idea of being young. The posters and their analysis here were published from the 2001 and 2018. to publicize the annual concert of the Orquestra Sinfónica Juvenil that usually happens between October and December in Aula Magna of Reitoria da Universidade de Lisboa. The pertinence of this collection to address themes such as youth and its relationship with classical music lies in the fact that these posters produced by GTM transmitted more effectively how the orchestra intends to build its visual image, because unlike other concerts, these were the first whose concept was worked out by orchestra's management, unlike the other concerts that were made, posters that were made by host institutions. Even though my thesis is focused on the 70s and the 80s, I choose the first decade of the 2000s because it gives an opportunity to witness a period of stability of this orchestra, even if it is not exactly the period of their greatest concert activity, and the communicative language already much more consolidated than before. This annual concert consists of an opera gala, which naturally includes guest singers and choir, and is objectively the orchestra's most attended event. In all, these 27 posters, as there are several versions in the same year, establish a dialogue from youth to the youth, bringing together symbols that hypothetically unite the classical and the modern. Well, as you can see from the title, this communication was following the ephemeris of Beethoven's birthday, celebrated during the year of the past year. But unfortunately, this date was postponed for obvious reasons, as you know. So if you allowed me, I will then broaden a little bit of my scope of analysis for this communication. Still, you'll see that Beethoven is a figure par excellence for the representation of Orquestra Sinfónica Juvenil. When addressing the concept of youth and imagery associated with it, it implies understanding that it is not confined to an age range of individuals, but a multiplicity of meanings. It's for this reason then that Bourdieu refers to youth as being no more than a word, and distinguish biological age from social age. To talk about young people as a social unit is from the outset a manipulation of values of a society which originates social difference, in this case by privilege or not, of being able to be part of it. The identity is built around consumption and its stereotypes, resulting in expectations that are of unequal access. In this way, and according to Bourdieu, what may define more transversally what youth is a social group, and as a social group and consumer, is the fact that this is a temporary status, which develops between the concepts of child and adult, and that the time in which one can enjoy this status is always a privilege. For this reason, the concept of youth is associated with a late entry in the labor market, a characteristic that in Portugal develops mainly in urban areas and in Lisbon. According to data from the Permanent Observatory of Portuguese Youth, between the 60s and 1997, we witnessed a systematic prolongation of school life and consequently a great independence on the family of origin. Factors that are the basis of the social social experience of youth. This is what I find really curious about these posters, because they aim to accomplish this idea of idleness of leisure time, as you can see in this one, Let's Play Classical Music, in representation of a group of young people that actually have to study a lot and start to work really early. Since the 80s, and especially since the 2000s, urban youth is deeply marked by audiovisual culture and by the evolution of technologies and their possibilities, which quickly change their daily lives. The generalization of the cultural offer, imagined to meet the demands of the spectator, results in a diversification of target audience, each one with its characteristics, often stereotype. The Portuguese youth or urban space began to construct their identity above all through the taste and cultural cycles imposed on them. With little purchasing power due to their increasingly later entry into labor market, youth gained a decisive weight in cultural consumption, above all in music circuits. Like Peppa Michael said, also in Portugal, more and more young people started to enjoy an exclusive time and space where they could socialize among themselves, not within a logic of productive work, but a logic of leisure. Consequently, informality as a media language is part of the identity and daily life of young people. Part of being young is to enjoy the freedom of living the present, practicing leisure time, while not starting adult responsibilities. A social space that allows irreverence and the impulse of those who have the future ahead of them, something that is reflected in a relaxed attitude towards orally developed language, which Luís Andrade associates with mass culture. Particularly since the 80s, we have witnessed a crossover of colloquial language between youth and the media. The use of new informal words began to be characteristic of the promotion of consumption directed to the youth, and that recognizes the monetary dependence of this social group, and often offers advantages in this sense, as discounts in concert halls. The youth card, o cartão jovem, which is in the 2000s was still quite in vogue, is a recognition of this practice, which brought the innovation of bringing together access to various discounts through a card that provided young identity for its user. It's a clear example of a fully capitalized youth identity that, and how this relates directly to consumption. In this way, as far as musical consumption was concerned, it became defined in great part by what was considered revolutionary, new, irreverent, as well as many other adjectives that opposed to the formality of both education and adult world. To young people in this transitory phase of their lives, this informality was allowed independently of their social class, substantially increasing the exclusive spaces and times where they could socialize in their free time with friends. Like live concerts of new and different music were favored, as well as night as favorite timeline. Fashion appearance and the entire aesthetic experience gained symbolic power in what is constructed as being young. This concert is for you, don't miss it, was one of the first expressions of this orchestra that reveals this pretension of being not only an orchestra of young people, but one that would gather a young audience. The colloquial language is an element that in this context automatically indicates that something is addressed to a young audience. In this version of the 2003 concert poster, we read the sentence, actually this one, 2 hours of classical music, that is the equivalent of a rave in 1998. I'm sorry. Yeah, it is. in association with the practice of music at night, changing the symbolic value of exposure of 2 hours of music. There is also another version with Verdi with the phrase sex, drugs, and classical music. It is possible to establish a parallel with Bourdieu when the distinction refers to older people value more static ethical dispositions, and younger people recognize themselves in a more typical values of modern everyday life. This relationship with modern life that is in 2000 easily associated with these new technologies, including domestic music consumption. In this poster, as you can see, we have the figure of Beethoven using headphones, which symbolize the consumption of music in the domesticity. It connects with youth, not only for being associated with modern life, but also because of leisure. The use of headphones proposes an alienation from the real world, which characterizes much of the juvenile music practice. Although there is this homogeneous image of youth built through consumption, this has always been more diverse than it seems. It will therefore not be unheard of that a layer of young people, also influenced by visual culture, has other figures like Bernstein's, or in Portugal, António Vitorino de Almeida, and claim classical music as part of their identity. Despite this frequency opposition between rock and classical music, artistic and creative diversity is also characteristic of this youth in a time of youth democratization initiatives. Is it from this logic of consumption and stereotypical constructions that we can assume that there is something of in some way a conflict between classical and musical taste and classical musical taste? However, youth as a social age does not cease to be much more diverse than it initially appears. Gestures towards the democratization of classical music, in particular the way it relates to educational issues, make the connection between the two words evident. Support young people, disseminate erudite music, and decentralize concerts. Summarize in a few words the intentions of Orquestra Sinfónica Juvenil that are reflected in these posters. Decentralization being understood as something that goes beyond geographical distribution. As Vitor Mota mentions, the director of this orchestra, one of the orchestra's goals is precisely to create new audiences through an idea of accessibility of classical music. As Pierre Bourdieu exposes, making certain types of culture accessible goes far beyond the economical capital, and without this symbolical value that it holds and the way it participates in various habitus. In this way, part of the process of spreading classical music to youth is to give the understanding that it is a type of culture in which they can participate. Also, the vulnerability of the process of growing up is associated with the image of Beethoven. In this 2004 poster, Beethoven wears a dental correction device that demonstrates the fragility and sacrifices of youth. It relates to an idea of future in cosmetic correction that will pay off after a long process. By distancing themselves from a competitive group in which they are inserted through their differences, this iconography finds a certain autonomy which is only possible to this use of these canonic figures as Beethoven. Otherwise, they would suffer the risk of devaluation. To quote, the most appropriate principles of differentiation to be recognized as present in culture's sphere that is to be legitimated by a field that tends to reject an external definition of its function are those that express in a more finished way the specificity of the intellectual or artistic practice, or rather a determined type of this practice. In this way, the present posters rely on certain symbols that correspond to the canonical normatives expected in classical music. Still, the greatest particularity of this orchestra that makes this distinction possible is its youthful character. The communication that Orquestra Sinfónica Juvenil establishes with its public is based on the concept and symbols that can be associated with youth to legitimate its counter-normativity, ending up reaching equally publics of various ages and identify themselves with those different lifestyles. As a result, a symbolic hierarchy is broken by bringing the other habits of listening to classical music closer to other social groups that consider it intangible due to its precedence, making this practice possible also for those who did not feel qualified to do so. This hierarchy is fragile, and it's maintained through this fallacy of intangibility, which these posters tend to break through their iconography. Thank you very much. I forgot to show this one that has also Verdi and Mozart doing those gestures. And yeah, thank you.
Angela, Flores, Baltasar, many thanks for your paper. Very, very interesting, very different. Are there questions? Okay. To go on touch. Remarks, please.
Thank you very much, Angela, for your nice presentation. I would like to know if the people who are in charge of making these posters, do they have much details about the programs that will be played in the concerts that they are advertising?
Yeah, that's a great question, because Beethoven is the figure that is more used in these posters, but it's an opera gala, and Beethoven don't have such a great repertoire in opera, so I think they're not. But Verdi appears very often too. So I don't think so.
So could we call it, I don't know the English expression for publicidad enganosa? Could you call it like that?
Possibly, because I played in some of these concerts, and I don't remember. Sometimes we've played overtures, but I think Verdi mostly. So it's a little bit of of that, actually. Yeah.
May I add something? Because this is not pubblicità ingannevole, but probably Beethoven's works like status symbol or sort of a brand. You recognize Beethoven, so yes, Beethoven is the man who threw the wig away. So is it forever young? He was.
Yeah.
He is still forever young.
And
Maybe.
he have this grumpy figure. I think it was laughable to use this figure mostly above all. Yeah.
The smiling one.
Yeah.
Yeah. The smiling
He's
one
actually-
is.
yeah.
I would like to add something. It is very interesting. The first image you show it represents very traditional Beethoven. The very yes. You show 2 times.
This
Yes,
one.
this one.
Yeah.
This painting is based on Blasius Höfel, 1814, but this very depiction is in Museo della Musica in Bologna, and he seems like an old countryman, so it's not really revolutionary. It's quite strange. Anyhow, also the idea of the headphones and connected Beethoven's with modernity or contemporary times is not really new. I think it dates back to the 70s, where the headphones also, there was the iconographical themes of Beethoven rock, Beethoven like Superman. And I have a question anyhow. Do you know how this advertisement, ADV campaign was received from young audiences or young people? I mean, what is your feeling when you?
These posters are from the 2000s, so the reception isn't so interesting. But in the 70s and the 80s was quite new, and people liked it. I liked it very much and attended to the concerts very often. Now it's more. Expected.
Yes,
but people,
I agree with you.
But they are quite famous, and people find them very laughable.
Yes, maybe the slogan were better. I mean, where the slogan, the claim, are a little bit more breaking and not the images. But I don't know. Maybe young people thinks differently. I don't know.
Besides that, I think that the young people that attend to these concerts are instrumentalists, actually. Yeah. So I don't know if their aim to reach new people and young new people. I don't think that today it's so. Well done.
Yes. I agree with you. So, any more questions? We are a little bit late. Many thanks. Many thanks again.
Thank you.
So I would like to inform you that is a little bit a change of the schedule, and now we are going to see the video of Professor Barbara Aniello. Professor Barbara Aniello is teaching in Rome, and she will present to you Sonus, her special project, how to design an itinerary of music iconography in the museums. She's an art historian, musician, and musicologist. Her main research area is in music iconography and comparative aesthetics. She has mainly a transdisciplinary approach, and she has organized many events such as the Symposium Silence, Polyphony of God in 2019, and see the invisible mercy in art. So she combines museological research to the pure research. And she was responsible of many exhibitions like this one, Sonus, Museo dell'Opera del Duomo, Florence, 2021. And then The Color of Sounds, Beethoven and his friends, Lisbon, 2005. And she worked several years abroad, especially here in Lisbon. And upon her return to Italy, she was hired by the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome as associate lecturer. Okay, perfect.
2 years of work, 18 authors, 35 catalog entries, 12 are cities. Sonus is born, the first issue of a series of music iconography dedicated to Italian museums. Each issue will correspond to a specific catalog and an exhibition. Conceived and curated by me, Sonus was born with the aim of revealing the beauty of sculptures, paintings, embroideries, frescoes and mosaics whose musical subject come from the most beautiful Italian cities. With the prestigious publishing house Centro di Firenze, we have designed a path where the visitor can read a QR code for each work and then listen to the sound of the instrument depicted in the corresponding statue, fresco, embroidery, miniature. Thanks to the multimedia resources that allow you to listen to the instrument depicted in the various monuments, the visitor can now not only contemplate but also listen to the contents complementing essays and catalog entries. A highly specialized international scientific committee accompanied the work of a young group of authors trained at the Pontifical Gregorian University that has restored the theological background to the works, illuminating them with an unprecedented light. The first issue of the series is dedicated to Florence and Opera del Duomo Museum, a complex comprising the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, Giotto's Tower, the museum and the baptistry of San Giovanni. The complete plan of the work includes the Museum of Rome, Naples, Bergamo, Ravenna, Palermo, Padova, Perugia, Viterbo, Vatican City, Tarquinia, Milan. Among many themes coming from the Old and New Testament, it was a real fun to trace a path between visual and sound based on the subtle game of silence. Silence, in fact, acts as a counterpoint to the thunderous game of noises and sounds that surprises the visitor, pushed to move between the museum, the cathedral, the bell tower, and the baptistry. The journey that the visitor makes, crossing the threshold of Sonus, is both atypical and utopian, weaving a symbolic itinerary between visual and sound, as in Ariadne's thread. He gathers the musical instrument to unravel in the forest of symbols that surrounds him, and thus ideally stands out the song joyfully raised by statues, holy garments, bas-reliefs, maiolica miniatures, frescoes, mosaics that unpredictable angels, putti, and children make. What, however, is most curious to find in this heap of thunderous sound is the subtle and hidden game of silence. In fact, there are many works that surprise us for their withdrawal in a fascinating counter-announcement. This is the case of the very refined sculpture created by Tino di Camaino, which opens the path, inaugurating this enigmatic game poised between sound and silence. The angel, in fact, plays, or rather played, a trumpet. while his hand dampens the vibration coming out of the bell of the instrument, silencing it. Music, like life, is ending to make room for silence. This sound takes over perennial rest in the eternal. That includes all sounds, even when inaudible for those who are still standing on earth. The funeral context of which this angel was part, probable reinterpretation of a torch extinguishing Puto, will explain the purpose of this silence. This angel, therefore, invites us to enter on tiptoe, visiting an exhibition of sound sculptures that also speaks of silence and warns us that the music is made of pauses, and that indeed pauses are themselves music. And there's more. A pause is an extension of the existence of sound, just as life exists in the afterlife beyond music, beyond its tangible and audible existence. In Luca della Robbia's Cantoria, sounds and silence are sculpted to a different degree of depth compared to the background. The first ones are more embossed, the second more crushed. In the figures in the background, the purse lips, the hand raised high up or placed on the shoulders of fellow singers in the front row, denote an interrupted music that leaves no room for doubt. This counterpoint of poses, represented by merely sketched young people whose figures emerge with a minimal relief with respect to the background, insinuates itself between the continuous melody of the groups of singers, dancers, musicians. As a result, we have the illusion not being in front of a sculpture group, but of a real score. Luca della Robbia's Cantoria is the personification of music in its sounds and in the absence of them. After all, on Earth, only this type of music can exist. For the silent music, that of the spheres, will we have to wait for heaven? And it is precisely the sky that a silent singer abandoned the score contemplates in a tile, the hand on the cheek in a nostalgic pose of Durarian memory, taking us out of the picture with him. This musica interrupta leads straight to the path of soundless music, the music of God. In contrast, the other cantoria, that of Donatello, offers, with its circle of dancing cherubs, a joyful counter. Here, the figurative canon corresponds well to the musical canon. A perfect consonance is found between the famous Nubere Rosarum Flores by the Flemish composer Guillaume Dufay and Florence Cathedral, when in 1436, on the occasion of his consecration under the dome of Santa Maria del Fiore, the isorhythmic motet become a sort of sound architecture corresponding to the Brunelleschi's engineer work. The canon on which the tenor's voices are woven and the episode of the motet, all cyclically ordered, like a variation of a single homorhythmic motif, refer to the circular dome roof designed by the architect of the Duomo, as well as to the circle of the winged putti of Donatello's pulpit. Thus, Dufay makes musically immortal the archetype of the circle of that substance, the container and the content of Santa Maria del Fiore. Therefore, it is impossible not to think of the strong link between Dante and Florence, given that the poet would have drawn inspiration precisely from the 13th century mosaic with the Last Judgment in the baptistry, Il mio bel San Giovanni, as he called it, while conversely the apocalyptic frescoes of the dome made by Vasari and Zuccari will seem a constant reference to his verses in the comedy. No wonder that in the middle of 15th century, the 14th century verses taken from the 10th canto of Paradise still resound source of inspiration for architects, sculptors and painters. Poi, sì cantando, quegli ardenti soli si fuor girati intorno a noi 3 volte, come stelle vicine a fermi poli. Thus, 4 cornerstones of the Florentine culture of the time appear to be gathered within the same circular emblem. Dante, with his Carol of Souls, metaphorically allusive to the stars, Brunelleschi, with its dome pointing to and symbolizing heaven, Donatello with the circle of putti of the cantoria that refers to the cosmic dance, Federico Zuccari with the angel with a trumpet painted in the soffits of the dome, which gives back the vision of the hereafter, the illusion of the music of the spheres, over which is based the inaudible celestial harmony, of which Santa Maria del Fiore is the emblem, is thus complete. from the silent contemplation of heavenly ideas, we pass to the abrupt interruption of the sound for the heart of faith in martyrdom. This is the case of Herod's banquet at the silver altar sculpted by Antonio di Salvi Salvucci and Francesco di Giovanni. The trio gradually ceases to play. The lute extends the pizzicato, keeping the left hand on the keyboard, and immediately the headband is lifted from the viol, while the performer clings to his psalter and staggering retreats in a sudden loss of balance. The pathos of silence takes over from the ethos of sound. The vocal cords of the Baptist, the infant who, from the womb of his mother, had first recognized and silently adored Jesus, have been cut off. He who had testified the Lord without words, with the typical exaltation of the whirlwind of winds or of newborn kids, by transmitting his presence to Elizabeth, hands up witnessing Christ without speaking, shedding blood from his severed vocal cords, which in turn generated a harsh arrest of the musician. So John the Baptist makes a circular journey from silence to silence, passing through the song and the cry. From the silence of his infantile adoration, he passes to convey the greeting to Elizabeth, who lets Our Lady sing the Magnificat, to the point of becoming the voice which, after proclaiming Ecce Agnus Dei, cries out in the desert to prepare the way for the Lord. Then, at the end of life, he returns to silence, as in the beginning, a silence that is mixed with the blood of martyrdom. The Baptist teaches that the silence can sometimes be much more eloquent than the cry. Still about suffering, the cessation of music and singing may indicate the mournful loss of land caused by expatriation, as indicated by the miniature of King David, painted by Antonio di Girolamo di Gologodino, linked to Psalm 137.
By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There, on the poplars, we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy.
This musical fast is suitable for the song of the exile, skillfully portrayed by the illuminator by means of the psalter abandoned on the ground, emphasizing the resulting loss of all joy against the lightness of the glories of the oppressing people. To David, once fallen to the ground, all that remains is to turn directly to God without the accompaniment of the instrument, melting into a solo in memory of his native land. His song is a silent one, a prayer without sounds, a psalm without music, almost a representation without figures, which is well suited to the serious moment through which Israel is going, his people, of which David is a living compendium, of which he is the spokesperson and collective figure. Designed by Lorenzo Ghiberti and built by Niccolò Di Piero Tedesco, is this Assumption coronation, with the Virgin Mary enclosed in the almond, supported by 4 angels and 2 seraphs, and surmounted by Christ, who hands her the crown from above, represents an interesting case of silenzium in music, interpreted by a trio of singers to whom corresponds symmetrically an instrument group composed of an organist, a fluteist, and a lutenist. While these latter are playing or maybe tuning, as can be seen from the right hand pinching the lute strings near the rosette, while the left heels abandoning the keyboard, in the singing trio an angel is intoning the Regina Caeli, the ancient Gregorian chant, as it is deduced from the scroll that holds in his hand.
Regina Caeli, lecare, alleluia, qui aquam egoisti portare, alleluia, resurrexit sicut dixit, alleluia, ora pro nobis Deum, alleluia.
It is possible to decipher the first three neumes in square notation, corresponding to the incipit and the letters Regina Caeli Light, placed under the tetragramma. This is one of the four Marian antiphons, together with the Salve Regina, Alma Redemptoris Mater, and Ave Regina Recelorum, three of the which praise to the kinship of Mary in accordance with the iconography period here. The other two angels are singing, or better, they were singing when one of them places a hand on the other one's shoulders, interrupting the performance and pointing at the same time upwards with the other hand. The gesture of hand on the shoulders, which signals the musica interrupta, is an iconographic code that repeats itself identical from the Scrovegni chapel onwards in many works dating from the 14th to 17th century, as we have already demonstrated, to emphasize the salient moments of the mysteries they involve or disconcert humanity: Annunciation, Nativity, Judgment. Furthermore, the gesture of the raised hand indicates on the one hand the upper scene of the coronation. On the other hand, alludes, philologically speaking, to the rhythmic scanning of the song. The angel interrupts his companion as if to reprimand him on the right time to sing. What is this right time? As we have already investigated, in none of the large family of apocryphal tales narrating the Transitus Mariae, there is an allusion to silence. Instead, in the stained glass window of Santa Maria del Fiore, the celestial music passes from vibration to silence. When at the top of the Assumption scene, the Madonna receives the crown from the hand of Christ. Here, in particular, the angel with the scroll who had sung the song is stopped by the companion behind, who seems to admonish him about the right pace at which to start again. while the third cantor points with his finger the phylactery, reiterating the gesture of the first. It is as if, while waiting to proclaim the hymn, the trio stopped to let Christ from above lay the crown on the holy head of his mother. It is only then, and not before, that one can sing the Regina Coeli with reason and pronounce the laetare interrupted in the middle, light, in the inscription on the score. The reason for the joy is precisely in the rich kinship of Mary, who, connected heaven and earth, is suspended from the arms of the angels. Only after the coronation the angel will be able to continue emphasizing and exalting with joyful words and music the glory reserved by the Son to the Mother. A small great discovery is the monochord in Florentine relief tile by Luca della Robbia, in which the figures of Pythagoras and Euclid are represented facing each other. Probably the first holds the monochord, the second is portrayed in the act of counting, and his fingers translates mathematically the geometric relationship on the experiments of sound. The musical instrument, whose name recalls the fact that it is composed of a single string, has a rectangular and oblong harmonic plane, partially preserved, on which the exit holes of the vibration are visible. Equipped with two fixed and one mobile bridges, the monochord allowed to experiment with different intervals of sound relative to the octave. The gesture of Pythagoras, with his index finger stretched on the board, reveals that the mobile bridge has already been moved and that the string has just stopped vibrating. The index is marking precisely the geometric point of the golden section in which the bridge is located, that is 2/3 of the length on the sounding board, while Euclid with a few fingers counts and also with the others the mobile notes. With a reasonable certainty, therefore, we can say that Pythagoras is getting at the upper fifth from the monochord. That is, if tuned the C, we are listening to a G. His companion Euclid is translating the geometric calculation made by Pythagoras. Let us remember, in fact, that Euclid himself put to good use the Pythagorean experiments, writing two treatises on music, the canon section and the harmonic introduction, which are based on the invention of the monochord. It took 8 centuries to see that this tablet was not a tablet but a musical instrument, whose vibration is interrupted to establish the relationship with its sounds and numbers. A peculiar case of sound subtraction can be found in the eastern sector of the dome frescoed by Vasari and Zuccari in Santa Maria del Fiore. It is, in fact, the only rib vault lacking the usual angels with straight trumpets that, on the contrary, in an almost stereophonic mode, surround the other 7 rib vaults, spreading their din in every direction in height, width, and depth. octave facing east at the main altar of the cathedral is a rib vault completely atypical compared to the others. Atypical and utopian. The painter, in fact, draws a non-place here, depriving it of the presence of tubes and their roaring sound. Moreover, Christ, the judge, appears above under the two titles that condemned and crucified him, Ecce Homo et Inri. Then the most luminous representation, charity, emerges prominent between faith and hope. According to the Pauline script and the allegories of time, emerged at the bottom Kronos, a flattened and winged man who raises and breaks his hourglass in half. And Mother Nature, who falls asleep reclined on herself, surrounded by the four seasons and by the skeleton of death. No angels with trumpets. Why? Because the time of music or the trumpets of the judgment is suspended, blocked, terminated. We pass from time to eternity. He who incarnated it, Ecce, for love, charity, and with sacrifice, Ecce Homo, until death by cross, Inri, came back, judge, to overcome time, Kronos, with death, skeleton, crossed the cycle of nature, Mother Nature, seasons, and let us enter another dimension, that of eternity. Can we do it now, as of now and how? Approaching below at the base of the 8th rib vault, at the main altar, receiving the super substantialis panis, the Eucharist. We turn around and the liturgical clock frescoed on the counter facade by Paolo Uccello speaks to us of the same silent call. Human existence ceases. We turn forward and Jesus' host is there. Heaven hic et nunc. Then history will enter into eternity. Then the silence will become music. Then from Tacet we will pass to Sonus. Thank you.
Many thanks for being here. See you after the lunch. Thank you.